there's so many other things that we could list, but I just wanted to bring Miss Margarita Hill and say thank you so much for the contributions that you give. She has a journal that's getting ready to come out. That's in the post. And we make sure we want to just love on her and give her all of the accolades that God has to offer for her this morning. So, without further ado, we're going to say good morning, good morning, good morning. Y'all can come off mute and say good morning to Margarita Hill, our
Good
grief
morning.
and wellness specialist.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning, guys.
Good
Good morning.
morning.
Listen, I am excited for what's to come. When Grammy called me a few months ago and said that God had put this on her heart to do a wellness symposium because, the world is in disarray with mental health going on, and May being the month for mental health. I have been, grief has been my cross to bear for quite some time. Um, it's probably started long before I can remember, but it has definitely been something that I've had to endure, as well as live in a state of constantly conquering it each and every day. Because we all know that when you lose somebody, that it doesn't just stop once the funeral is over and all of those things. So it has become the thing that God has tasked me with to be a vessel for his people. And for that, I am extremely grateful for that. So, as Grammy said, a little bit about myself. Currently I'm a seventh grade middle school teacher teaching reading, but next year I'll be moving into the behavioral specialist job at my school. God has placed it on my heart to move out of the classroom because there are so many kids who need help with their social emotional skills, how to manage their behavior, coping skills, those kind of things. And that is something that's near and dear to my heart. I love kids. I teach them Zumba. I also think it's very important to nurture their mental health, because kids are going through things that those of us who are, in the 30s and up, that we didn't have to deal with, social media, having access to so many things on the internet. There's nothing anymore that's sacred. We had to go search for stuff when I was growing up, and the internet had just started back in the 90s. So we had to literally know where to go and look for stuff. But everything nowadays is in the palm of these kids' hands. And so I am excited for my new position next year, to be servicing the children at my school. And as Grammy said, grief has become my thing, and I'm happy to do it. When I was 19, my father was murdered when I was 19 years old. I had just had a baby who happens to be 25 this year, just 25 a couple of weeks ago. And he was not in my life on an everyday basis or even on a regular basis. And so, having just become a mother, a freshman in college, I tell people all the time, you have to be careful what you ask God for, because he'll give it to you. And sometimes we're not ready for when he give it to you. Be like, no, Lord, I ain't signed up for that. Oh, no, I was just playing when I said that. It sounded good, and it sounded like the philosophical thing to say. So I said it, and now here we are. But when I was 19, my father was murdered, and I had to muster up the courage to pull the plug, because of his injuries. He was basically brain dead. And here I am thinking to God, like, first, God, like, I was already mad at God because I felt like he took my college experience away. Even though I did the thing to get myself pregnant, I was still mad at the Lord. Y'all know how that is. Like, you be mad, you did the thing, but then you mad at God because of the consequences that comes after that thing. So that was me. I'm like, first of all, you let me get pregnant. Everybody else go to college, get the freshman 15, 30. I got the freshman 9 months. I got pregnant. And then on top of that, after I have this baby, now this man who was supposed to help me and take care of me, but did not do so, has now had his life taken. And I have to be the one to make the medical decision to allow him to go whenever you see fit, and not allow the machines to keep him alive. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how am I supposed to do this for somebody who wasn't there for me in a sense that a father should be? And I think that was when I really realized the heaviness of grief. Not only am I grieving, my teenage years because now I'm a mother, I'm grieving a father who was never there for me and having to make those decisions about his life that will affect me throughout the continuation of my life. And having to go through his trial because they were able to find the young men who took his life, and having to stand up there and say, look, you took away my child's opportunity to have a grandfather. You took away my opportunity as an adult to have a father who could have very much turned his life around and been in my life as an adult, but I would never know that. And so that was my real first thing with grief. But that thing right there, I shoved that thing down into the pits of hell, okay? Because I was like, nope, God, I can't do this. There's no way that I can do this. I can't do this. I got to finish college. I have this baby. Like, my mother had some health issues and things going on. Like, I can't do this, God. So I'm going to just have to, hide this thing and, you know what I'm saying, into the darkness. And I went on about my life. But as I continued to go on about my life, it still continued to creep up when those, situations happen where you want to have a dad, you want to have a father, and then they're not there. And so I was like, okay, but I can't do that, God. I can't, that's not a thing I can tend to right now. So we're going to put that back on the shelf. And then in 2006, I lost my mom. I'd never lived away from my mom except for college. So her leaving me was like the straw that broke the camel's back, because I was like, okay, first of all, God, like, I don't understand how you thought that this was okay. Like, how did you think for 1 second that it was okay for you to take my mother, the one person who loves me unconditionally, has my back? You just thought it was okay. Like, you was just sitting up there and like, oh yeah, let me just go on that. Let me just go ahead and take pictures. It'll be fine. Like, I was like, make that make sense, sir, because I'm so thoroughly confused as to how you thought that this was a thing for me. Like, how important she is to every aspect of my life, my whole entire being, and everything. And you just was sitting up there in your little gold chair. That's how I imagine God sitting, on the throne with his chair is gold, you know what I'm saying? Got the big old high back and everything. And he was like, yeah, let me just do that. I was so angry. And so I kind of, went through all of the things, the funeral and everything. And then I was like, you know what? I can't do it. I can't grieve because I have a child. I have to find a place to live. I have so many things that I had to do. So I kind of like put on this strong suit because everybody was saying, you know what? You have to be the strong one. Like, you got to be strong because, you know, um, you got to be strong for your child. You got to be strong for your siblings. Even though I'm the baby of five, you got to be strong for all of these people. And then people say those, inanimate things like, oh, God needed another angel. Where is that in the Bible? Where is it at? Because the crazy things that we have come up with to try to make folks feel better when somebody died is insane, because we'd be like, oh my God, yes, God needed another angel. And it was just their time. That part is true. It's definitely their time. We don't get to say that or whatever. But saying that God needed another angel, and that, they watching over us or whatever. God got enough angels up there. Gabriel and them is up there doing their jobs. Okay. They doing their jobs. He did not need my mama up there to be another angel. What I realized was it was just her time. We all have a time, and it was hers. But when I was knee deep in my grief, I didn't care nothing about that time whatsoever. I did not care whatsoever. That timeline didn't mean anything to me. Or, people like, oh, you just have to be strong, and, they looking down on you or anything like that. Like, that's just the stuff that we say to people to try to make. And when people say that stuff to you, it ain't even for your benefit. I realized that was never for me. That was for them, because people don't know what to say. And so when people don't know what to say, they go to those cliche things of, yes, you know what I'm saying? Let me say this thing. Let me try to make them feel better. And I realized that there was no strength in losing my mom. There was nothing for me to have any strength behind or for. And what I realized, instead of me saying that I needed to be strong, I should have relied on God's strength and not my own, because there's no way that I can get through this without the strength of God. And so I basically, just kind of like went through life trying to wear this coat of strongness and trying to be there for people and everybody else, but I was never there for myself because I was so busy trying to help other people that I left myself uncovered. And so, one of the things that I want to talk about today that leads me into it is, who is covering you while you recover? Because it's so important. With anything that you go through, anything that you deal with in life, if you don't have the proper covering, then you're literally out here by yourself. And God didn't put us on this earth to do life alone. This is why He gives us family and friends and people to help us, to cover us while we're recovering from things. But a lot of us want to live in this falsehood of, I'm okay, it's fine, and sometimes as Christians, because people and the church try to make us feel like we can't properly grieve. We are not supposed to be sad because we love God and He is good and all those things. All that is true. All that is true. And weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. But God ain't never said you couldn't weep at night. We skip that whole part. All we talk about is the joy in the morning, because there is joy in morning people, and not in the morning like the morning light, but morning, morning. There is joy in morning. And I feel like I'm in this place now where I have found joy in the morning because God is there. Because God is there with me in that morning period that I am having or that I am going through. And a lot of times we think that just because we're in church every Sunday, sitting on them pews, and on Wednesday, and every Bible study and every revival and everything else, that we are somehow exempt from grieving. And that is not true. And when we sit around and not allow ourselves to do that, we're not only doing a disservice to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, to God, because we aren't operating in the way that He would have us to. We are supposed to mourn. We are supposed to. God tells us, mourn with those who are mourning. But why don't we? What we do is we try to fix them people. We be like, oh, like, okay, girl, like, call me if you need some. And the moment that I pick up the phone to call you, you busy. You at Walmart, you at Target. You got every excuse in the book except for to be there for me like you said you would. And then we wonder why people also hide their grief and not make it a thing, because I don't feel safe. It's important for us to have holding spaces for people, because if we don't, then this is how people fall through the cracks. This is how people end up on the other side of things. And the one thing that I have learned is, you can either tend to your grief or your grief gonna tend to you. And I had to learn the hard way of being on the latter end. And that grief ended up tending to me, like literally. Like I have severe chronic migraines, because I mean, I'm talking about 20 to 30 migraines a month. When Grammy met me in New Jersey, I was just coming from Okinawa, Japan, and coming back stateside. And it was like grief hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I was literally on this emotional roller coaster that was just crazy. We went on this trip to New York, and grief decided to show its face right in the middle of Times Square. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, like, what am I gonna do? I didn't have any choice but to and I wanted to hide it from Grammy. I wanted to pretend like I was having the best time of my life in them New York streets with her granddaughter and my daughter. But Gree was like, sis, absolutely not. You might as well go ahead and be front and center, because you finna have to acknowledge this, because otherwise it's gonna go downhill. And I had to literally like break down and tell her, like, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I felt this immense amount of sadness. Even though it was a beautiful experience for Reagan and Kylie, and having them in New York, we rode the train and we was all bundled up to see the lights at Rockefeller Center. Grief was like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. You miss your mother right now. You wish it was your mom instead of Grammy. And I'm like, oh my God, this lady's nice enough to let me on this trip with her granddaughter. And now here I am, like I want to be anywhere else but here with her and her granddaughter and my daughter. I wish it was my mama instead. And I'm like, oh my God, I felt so ungrateful for the experience, you know what I'm saying, that I was experiencing or whatever. And then Grammy automatically picked up her spirit of discernment was like on point because she was like, what just happened? And I had no choice but to tell her exactly what was going on and let her in on that. And I appreciate that because then she allowed me the space. She allowed me to be able for her to be somebody who was covering me as I was recovering from that moment in New York in the middle of Times Square with all them thousands of people. And so that's what I mean when you have people in your life and you know that they truly mean it and they say, hey, I'm here for you, whatever I can do for you, let me do that. Allow them that space to do that. Because sometimes in grief, we want to cower and we're like, nobody's here for me. But are you letting the people be there for you? Are you letting them? Because we can say nobody's here for me, but when people offer their help to you, you decline it because we don't want people to see how we really are. We don't want people to see how in such a disarray we are with our grief. We don't want people to know that. We don't want people to know that literally I'm not like that. Because let me tell you something, that imposter syndrome that we be having out here in these in these Christian streets, because we be acting like we everything in a bag of chips and all that, and we not, is real. Okay. And let me tell you something. And you know who they children are? Grief and shame. Imposter syndrome. And then the daddy and the mama is grief and shame. Okay. Because look, we will try to be out here walking around trying to be more than what we are and being stuff that God ain't never called us to be. God ain't never told us to be half of the things that we out here trying to be. Because let's be honest, we don't even ask him, God, is this for me? We be like, oh, God brought it to me. I'ma do it. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No, sir. Absolutely not. And then we end up in these spaces and doing things that God ain't never told us to do. Trying to make ourselves fit in these spaces that ain't even big enough for us. Some of us don't realize how big we are in God's kingdom. And so we shrink ourselves because we don't want to make other people feel awkward. And I have done that so many times that I can count because of my grief. I shrunk myself. And I'm like, God ain't going to use me. I'm still out here grieving. Like, what can I teach people? Like, I be struggling at least 2 or 3 times a week. So, how is it possible that God is going to use me, somebody who is still grieving and haven't mastered grief? And God was like, first of all, you ain't got to master nothing because I'm the master of all things. So I don't need you to master anything. I just need you to follow me and do the things that I am telling you to do. Because what happens is when we grieve and we don't take it seriously, it ends up hitting people, places, and things that it was never supposed to hit. It started to spill over into our marriages, into our family relationships, into our jobs, into our careers, into our relationship with our children. Like none of us know how to properly grieve. There is no blueprint for it. I tell people grieve your way, the way that you feel is necessary, as long as it doesn't bring hurt and harm to other people. You are allowed to blaze your own trail of how you decide to grieve, as long as you're tending to your health. Because what happened is when we don't take care of our mental and emotional health, it becomes a mental illness because we aren't tending to it, all of those little pieces of ourselves. And now we wonder why we are gaining weight, why we are unhealthy, why we can't seem to hold on to friendships and relationships, why we are easily offended. Let me tell you something, the spirit of offense and grief is real out here in these streets. It's like grief's cousin. Because listen, you will get so offended just because somebody asks you something because you haven't tended to the thing that you are supposed to. And now you wonder why you don't understand why people don't come to you, why people aren't trying to take care of you, because you're easily offended because you won't recognize the thing that is holding you back. And a lot of times that's grief. And grief is not just losing somebody. Although my grief has been the bulk of my grief has been because of a death of my mom. And in between that, I lost a dad, I lost a brother, I lost a nephew. I have lost so many people, but I also have not allowed that, now that I'm in this space, to hold me hostage. I'm no longer a hostage to grief. At this point, I look at grief as my companion, because if I don't, we're friends. And sometimes we like our friends and sometimes we don't. Sometimes they get on our nerves. And you be like, girl, I'm gonna talk to you later because you really vexing my spirit right now. So let's revisit this tomorrow. I'd be like, look, Grief, tonight I'm gonna just let me go to bed and then we'll tend to this tomorrow. Okay. I'll see you tomorrow. Because otherwise, because otherwise, like seriously, because otherwise, like, I mean, what I'm gonna do? You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying, look, I ain't saying I'm gonna ignore you or nothing. I'm just saying not tonight. Okay. Can you give me a break and let me regroup tomorrow? Okay. And we will convene. You know, and I tell you, it has been the best thing ever for me, realizing and understanding how important it is that I lock arms with grief instead of pushing it away, instead of looking at it as a nuisance and something that I don't have to do anything for. You know what I mean? Because when you're in the fire, um, and grief, it feels like the pits of hell. It really does. It's like, I know this can't get any worse. Like, this is the worst thing ever. I don't have my people, I don't have my person. Like, and a lot of time, grief feels like punishment and sacrifice at the same time. Like, God, you're punishing me by taking my person. You're punishing me because now I don't have my parents. You're punishing me because now I don't have my brother. These people are essential to my well being. You know what I mean? But then it also feels like sacrifice because you have to sacrifice a part of yourself, you know, in order for you to heal. Because a lot of times, you know, healing is not linear. You know, grief is like a roller coaster. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you up there on the road. I don't even like roller coasters, by the way. So sometimes you be up there like this, your hands all over, and then other times you be like, okay, okay, let it be over, let it be over, let it be over. Like, because that's exactly how it is. Sometimes you're like, your memories of them surround you, and you're like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I can remember all these things, and your crying turns to laughter. And then some days it's like this traumatic experience where you remember every small thing that happens, you know. And we end up making ourselves, sometimes as grievers, we end up making ourselves like having this victim mentality, because we feel like, why me? Like, I don't understand. I'm a good person. Like, why would you do this to me? Like, why would you do this? Like, you know me. You created me, Jesus. Like, so I really don't understand why you thought that this was okay. You act like you don't know me. Like, what? Like, I'm so thoroughly confused. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you like, I pay my tithes. Okay. I'm at church every Wednesday and every Sunday. Okay. You know what I'm saying? You see me up there. You know what I'm saying? I be getting the first lady her tea. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Pastor asked me to help for something. I help. I go to church. I help others. So why is this my punishment? Why was my punishment for you to take somebody from me? Like, but if you look deep enough in it and you realize that, and you seek God deep enough, you will see that all the pain has a purpose. When you're knee deep in it, it don't feel like it. It don't feel like it. It took me, I swear, it's taken me, probably, my mom has been gone for 18 years, but it has probably taken me 15 of those in these last 3 years since I wrote my book to feel like my pain has now, when I surrendered to the pain, it became my purpose, because I didn't realize how much freedom there is in surrender. When you surrender it all to God and you give Him everything, even the little small pieces that you don't like, that you can't stand, even your hostile relationship with Him, because sometimes it gets hostile with Him because you like, Lord, like, really, like, I just don't understand. Like, you're supposed to love us, you're supposed to do all of these things for us, and here I am hurting and don't even know how to handle any of these things. Yet at the same time, it's like, when you surrender it all to God, give God the pain, you give God the grief, you give Him all of it, the relationship of it, and then God can do something with that. He can do something with that. Your pain can become purpose, and you have no idea. And I want to encourage you that if you do have a story, if you have a testimony, share. Share it with people because that's what God has called us to do. Because you have no idea how your pain can unlock somebody else's purpose. Somebody is waiting for you. God has called us all to be vessels, and somebody is waiting for you. You are attached to somebody. You are the vessel for somebody. There is somebody out there that you are going to unlock their freedom because of your testimony. Because no matter what we go through, even though we know people who go through it, we see it out there on social media, people we don't even know, we also know that sometimes like sharing ourselves frees somebody else because we think we're out there alone. Because I thought that I was out there, even though I know people who had lost their mamas, but I'm like, these people don't feel like I feel. They didn't love their mom like I love my mom. They had a relationship with their mom like I had with my mom. Ain't no way they could understand what I'm going through. And it wasn't until I realized that me surrendering to that pain and sharing with other people that it also freed me and let other people know you're not out here by yourself. And locking those thoughts and feelings inside your head, all you're doing is putting yourself in mental jail. That's it. You're putting yourself in mental jail. And then you're not doing the things that you need to do to get out of jail. And then you asking the good Lord to help you, like, Lord, let me out, let me out. But you refuse to give God the keys. Because for some strange reason, holding on is better than letting go. But if you let it go, God's there to catch you. So you don't have to hold on to it because God wants every single part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like he wants all of it. Like he doesn't want the small minute, just the small minuscule things. He want all of it, the big things. Let me tell you something. When I wrote my book, I had so many conversations with God during the process. And as I was having these conversations with him, and I'm like, Lord, I don't want to write this book because first of all, Lord, I didn't like writing papers in college, okay? And I got 2 degrees. And no. So I don't understand how you thought telling me to write this book was just gonna be all right. And God was like, girl, just write the book. And then it's like I was having these internal conversations between me and Grief and God. And Grief was like, girl, just write the book because you be doing too much. Like, and you really starting to get on me and Jesus' nerve. Okay. Because like stop playing with us. And I didn't realize until after I wrote my book and published it how those conversations, those things, those thoughts in my head that I had kept captive that I didn't want people to know that I was really feel like I was out here having imaginary conversations with Grief and Jesus. So many people was like, yo, like I had them same conversations. Like, oh my God. Like now I feel like, okay, I am not crazy because I literally be in here out having these conversations. It's so freeing when you just allow God to be God and you be obedient. Because listen, obedience is definitely one of the top currencies of the kingdom. And we can't keep asking God for stuff but refuse to walk in the spirit of obedience. You're like, okay, God, I need you to help me begin this healing journey with grief. But every time He tells me to do something, I don't do it. God, can you help me do this? But I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. God's like, oh, girl, like, I really need you to go out here and start this grief group for people. Nah, God, I ain't gonna do that. Now, you told me to write this book. I wrote that book. Now, this is why I draw the line in the sand. I ain't gonna do that. I'm like, because ain't nobody finna come listen to me. These people don't know me. I'm not doing that. And then you put it out there, and God was like, and then the people come in tenfold to the point that you have to tell people, I don't have enough room. You have to wait for the next cycle. But I would have never been able to do that had I continued to walk in the spirit of disobedience. God's never going to call you to a place that He's not going to take care of you, even in your grief. He's never going to call you to a place. He's never going to call you in the middle of your grief, however it looks, and not take care of you. He's always going to take care of you in that space. And when it comes to grief, no matter what you're grieving, no matter how you're grieving or whatever, there's so many different kinds of grief that are out there. Like, I feel like there's secondary losses, those losses where that impact so many areas of your life that create also multiple losses from your primary loss. For me, when I got married, my mother wasn't there. Having my second child, she wasn't there. Those were so many secondary losses that I didn't realize that were just as important as that major loss. And you're grieving. Your grief is also the pain of those other losses because of her death. Those were also the things. And then you also have, I feel like a lot of us walk around in this mass grief, um, that keeps us from recognizing the things. It has to do with our behavior. It has to do with the symptoms that we often mask, those physical symptoms, those headaches, those overeating things, those high blood pressure, diabetes, all of those things. And how we treat people, like the anger that starts to seep in, that spills over into things that we just angry with people. We see somebody and we automatically angry. A lot of times that's because we are masking our grief. We are masking those things, and we don't tend to them. It end up hitting people, places, and things that it's not supposed to. And then you also have your disenfranchised grief, which is one of the huge, um, biggest types of grief in the world, because outside of death, because it's when your culture, your society, or your support group, or the people in your family make you feel like your grief is invalid. Because when them people be like, oh, girl, you ought to be over that by now. It's been 18 years, ma'am. Okay. Like, it's been 18 years. You should be over that by now. How do you get over that? Like, there's no book for this. How do I get over that? Like, how? It's not even something that you should get over. It's something that you have to learn how to live with. It's something that you have to learn how to walk through. And as long as you're walking with Jesus, you're never going to walk through it alone. People make us feel like our grief is invalid. This also occurs when a death is, by suicide, when a death is by sickness or a car accident, or, a miscarriage, or even a divorce. Because people feel like you shouldn't be grieving that divorce, girl. The Lord moved that man or woman out your life. You shouldn't be grieving that. That don't mean nothing. You also have to let go of those memories. You have to let go of the life that you thought you were going to have with them, the plans that you had made for 10, 15, 20 years from now. That doesn't make that grief any more invalid than the fact that I lost my mom. It all weighs the same. But for some strange reason, the world tells us that it doesn't matter. It has anything to do with it. People think that because if there's a loss that is not death, it doesn't hold the same weight. But it's just like sin. No sin is greater than the other. No grief is greater than the other. Because to you, it all matters. No matter what you lost, no matter what you're grieving, it matters to you. So I can't stand beside you and be like, oh, because you lost your job and I lost my mom, that yours is greater than mine. It's not. God takes them all seriously. There's no hierarchy when it comes to it. It's just like we know for sin, there's no hierarchy for it with God. It all weighs the same in the kingdom of God. And so does grief. It all weighs the absolute same. And then you have that traumatic grief that we all have experienced of, someone dying in a traumatic way, or you have been frightened, or even just having a traumatic childhood. Growing up with parents who traumatized you, did the bare minimum for you, but nevertheless you were traumatized. That grief matters too. Nobody gets to tell you how to grieve. There is no prerequisite for it. There's no manual book. There's none of that. And all them 5 stages of grief, although I hit them all, some people don't. Some people don't. You also grieve a lot of things, like when it comes to your health. You 1 minute you this healthy 20-year-old, and you hit your 40s, and you know what I'm saying, you got textbook everything, diabetes, overactive bladder, like all of these things, because you like, wait a minute now, I was just healthy about, like, 10 years ago. Now, honey, if it ain't a bathroom there, I can't go. Okay. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like trying to see if, going down the aisle, be like, oh, they made the bins, they look good. I might need to give me some of them. And having those physical disabilities and those things that you once had. And then you think, oh, now you feel like, oh my God, like I took for granted what I had. And now I don't know what to do because I feel like you know, I didn't take care of this. I didn't take care of myself when I could. And now I'm having to grieve these things. But you also have to realize too that God is very strategic in everything that he does. God is very strategic. He does everything in decency and order, and everything always has a purpose. And then you have, the collective grief. I feel like the collective grief is one of those things that, has a lot to do with church, because that is when our community, our society, our village, our nation, and because of an event, because of a war, because of a natural disaster, a terrorist or death of a public figure or things of that nature or whatever. Like, and grieving and church hurt is real. Being hurt by folks in the church, being hurt by the people who supposed to love us, who's supposed to care us. Church is supposed to be the one place that we can go, that we can get everything we need. That is God's pharmacy for us. Going to church, we're supposed to get all these things, but that don't always happen. Sometimes church is the one place that hurts us the most. Because when we're going through, instead of the church rallying around us, they're trying to fix us. That's not their job. The church ain't supposed to fix you. Jesus is. Jesus is supposed to fix you, not the church. The church is kind of like the triage place that you go. When you go and you have triage and they fix your, what I mean, those wounds or whatever. But the deep seated things, when you need surgery, when you need for God to take those things out and put the good things back, take the bad things out and put the good things in, that's God's job. But that, nevertheless, that doesn't make it hurt anymore, any less when we go to church and we see our pastors and our first ladies and our deacons and our deaconess fall from grace, because we were never supposed to put them on a pedestal. So now we're grieving who we thought they were, or they're different for everybody. How they treat one person, you're like, oh, they could never do that. They would never do that to such and such, like them good people. And we have put them on this pedestal of things and make them seem like they are big, just as big as God, which is our first mistake. We feel like they're just as big as God. And now when they have their fall from grace, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to handle ourselves. Now the church is in shambles. We're in shambles. The congregation, everybody fighting each other, everybody trying to figure out who the big dog is now and who's not. Instead of taking it all to God at the end of the day. Because ain't nobody the big dog except for big God. That's it. That's it. But then we don't know what to do with ourselves. And so now we're scrounging around trying to find somebody to replace this person in our lives, instead of saying, God, you know what? I'm going to give this to you. You replace them. You send me where you need me to go. And so grieving those things and grieving that place, that church that you had because you loved it and there were some great people there, but it hurt you, that's real. And listen, it's just like you can't get out of one abusive relationship and go to another. And I feel like that's what we do. Like we get out of one situation, like my mama used to say, you jump out the pot and get into the frying pan. It's still hot. They both was on there still hot because we don't take the time in the middle. The middle is so important. We don't take the time in the middle to seek God for what it is that he needs for us to do. The beginning and the end is great, but what about the middle? The middle is where you find God. The middle is where you find peace. The middle is where you find joy. The middle is where you cry out to God. The middle is where God will meet you right there in the middle. Because he's always going to be at the beginning and the end. I want the God that's of the middle. That's the God that I want. Of the things that's in between. The things that I have no control of or whatever. Because we know in the beginning we was born and in the end we're going to die. But you want God to meet you in the middle. In the middle of your grief. That's where you want God to meet you at. You want him to meet you right there where you don't know what to do, but he does. Because remember, we don't have to know what to do. We don't have to, God ain't asking us to do that. So it's like if we aren't careful, grief will take up a permanent residence in our lives. And then it's going to be asking for you to pay rent in your own house. And sometimes it's stuff that we cannot afford. Sometimes things cost us things that we just cannot afford. And we cannot afford to continue to allow grief to take over our lives. We cannot continue to allow it to wreak havoc because we are somehow have subscribed to these unrealistic expectations that the people have of our grief. Stop letting them folks put them unrealistic expectations on you so that you're supposed to be over this. You're supposed to be strong. You ain't supposed to be crying. You ain't supposed to be this because you are in the church and because is over this and you're over that and you have this degree and you have that or whatever. None of that stuff matters to God. God wants you whole and healed. He don't want you out here pretending like you're doing more or being more than you need to be. That's not what it wants. When I first started, I did this group called the Heart of Elijah because Elijah um his journey spoke to me because it's about the promises that God gave Elijah, right? That we can be confident and go and do God's work, even when the well. And at that time, my well was grief. My well was grief at that time when it begins to run dry. And I felt like God was reminding me that I will drink from the brook, that the same brook that He gave Elijah, and I'm going to be great. And when I was knee deep in that, I was like, ain't no way. And that's the promise that God made to Elijah. And it's also the promise that God is making to you. And He's going to continue to remind you to never, He's never going to take us to the place He's not going to see about us. And He's not going to sustain you. And so the ultimate provision for your grief is God. You can allow God and grief can be super transformative, but you got to do the inner work. It's important for you to do that inner work. Like, because if you don't, you got to work on your heart and mind and have those hard conversations. And most of the time, those hard conversations start with yourself. You got to have those hard conversations with yourself before you can have them with somebody else. You and Jesus have to come to an understanding before you can let somebody else into that space. Because once you let somebody else and you don't have the proper understanding of self in your relationship with God, is the moment that you let somebody else into that, now it's become tainted because now they're going to come with their own preconceived notions. They're going to come with their own definition of grief or how things should be. They're going to come with those things. And now it's no longer about you and the relationship or the things that you're trying to build with God. Now it's about you and them. It's okay for you to feel all the feels, and for you to embark on a new journey with your grief. That's so important. You can make grief whatever it is that you want, but I'm telling you, make it your friend, because if you make it anything else, it won't end well for you. Like, we have all these people in our life who aren't ready to hear us or to listen to our grief. And that's because, people think that we should move on. There's nothing you can do. There with God, you still got life to live and all of these things. And so we feel like, oh, this life that God gave you, He gave it to you for you. I'm not out here. I had to learn, I'm not out here living this life for my mama. My mama is up there in her mansion with streets paved with gold and whatever. And I'm pretty sure she be talking to God about me, but I'm pretty sure she ain't up there like, oh Lord, let me trade my mansion back up so I can go down here with my baby, because she know that God gonna take care of me. So while we're out here really thinking that we can't, move forward with our life, we should. We should. We only got one life to live. And you got to make it count. You got to make your relationship with God, you got to make it with something. And moving on by life's measure is good. That's what people tell us. Life is good, and life was good, but y'all, I didn't move on. And it was okay for me to talk about my mom. I realized that I had so many people in my life who allowed me that space to talk about my mom and the whole space for me and never make me feel like, even if I told the same story 13,000 times, they never cared because they knew it was important for me to be able to do that. And I realized that my mother is very much present in my life still. She may not physically be here, but her spirit lives on in me. It lives on in my children. It lives on in everybody that she has come in contact with in her life. Even now, 18 years later, I still have people who come to me and remind me about who she was to them and how much they miss her and love her. And I also know that that's God's way of letting me know that even though I may feel alone, I'm never alone, that they both are with me. I carry them in my spirit, I carry them in my heart and in my mind. Like, I know that. You don't have to always continue to focus on moving forward or letting go. God ain't never told us we had to let go of these people. That's why he gives us memories. This is why he lets us have experiences. So that when those people are gone, when those things are gone, that we have these things that will help us. These things will literally help us. And I know you guys know the body keeps the score. So if you don't take care of it, it'll start to shut down. If you don't take care of the things that are important to you, your mental health, your emotional health, your social health. And I know that it seems like when you're grieving that you want to be isolated, but I encourage you to seek community over isolation. Because let me tell y'all something, in that isolation, the devil gonna show up and with all his minions. Because he like, oh, you want to be by yourself? I got you exactly right where I want you. Now I'm gonna make you think everybody out to get you, nobody care about your grief, nobody care about you crying, which is not true. That's where the devil wants you. He wants you in isolation, but God wants you to seek community. God wants you to seek the people around you who can care about you, who can love on you, who can take care of you. I know it seems like it because we don't want people to see us for our true self. I thank God for my circle of girlfriends who allow me to cry, who allow me to just, randomly text them some random thing about my mom that I remember or whatever, like, and those kind of things. Like, I'm grateful for that. I hope and pray that everybody has that. And if you don't have that today, get that. You can start with me. I'm happy to be your village. I'm happy to be your safe space. Because otherwise, grief will end up traumatizing you and make you fearful of everything. It will make you fearful that all these bad things are happening to you because there's a part of our brain that goes into survival mode, right? And that's right below our rational brain. You know what I mean? Like, because you're like, oh, I'm in survival mode. I need to figure out, okay, I need to do this before I can do that. I need to do that. And that right there, that's when we end up working ourselves into denial and making us feel like we're better off than what we were. I don't need nobody. I could just get through this on my own. We all need somebody. And it's full of stops and starts, which is okay. And it will interrupt your life without little to no warning. You'd be like, hold up, wait a minute, you walking through the mall. And y'all, I was in a grocery store one time, and I was just pushing my cart, and this lady was just talking, and I could have sworn she sounded just like my mama. I abandoned the cart and ran off to the bathroom because I felt like a crazy person. And when I came back out, the lady was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, it was so weird. And I was like, "Yes, ma'am." I was like, "But you sound exactly like my mom." And she was like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" And she was like, "Come here, give me a hug." When I went in that bathroom, I was like, "God, look, I don't know. I cannot break down in this grocery store. I need to get these groceries. I need to go about my business. Like, I need you to fix that." And I came right out there and God fixed it. That lady gave me a hug, and you couldn't tell me that wasn't my mama hugging me. Because that was God right there letting me know that I'm gonna be all right. That even though I ran up out of there like my pants was on fire and thought that, you know what I'm saying, somebody playing some cruel joke on me, I needed that hug that day. My spirit was so heavy that day. And God was like, okay, I need to figure out a way to love on my child. So he sent that lady in that grocery store and somehow her voice transformed into my mom's. And God gave me exactly what I needed. But imagine had I not been open to that. I would have left out of that grocery store worse than what I came in there with. Because grief is just like a plant. When you have them plants that just never die. Some of y'all got be people be giving y'all plants and you hope it die, but it just won't die because you ain't a plant person. You like, I'm not a plant mama or a plant daddy. So you know what I'm saying? So you're like, I just wanted to die because I'm really not a plant person, but they was nice enough to give it to me, so I want to keep it. You know what I'm saying? And no matter how you neglect it or whatever, it'd be like it still keep going. You be like, dang, this thing never gonna die. Grief is just like that. Like sometimes it don't necessarily need anything from you. It's going to take what it wants. What we ignore will grow. And what you resist will persist. Because listen, grief is very, very persistent. It is not going to go away. So when you surrender to your pain and you live in it because you know what's on the other side, you are just freeing so much of yourself that you have no idea the parts of you is just waiting for you to surrender to that. The part of your story that is just waiting for you to let go and let God. That's what God wants from you. I let myself die when I left a part of me die when my mom. But I had to realize, like, I'm coming back. I'm like, nope, I'm coming back. This ain't my story. I won't let my mother's legacy die with me in my grief. I'm gonna let it live right on with us. I'm like, oh no, I'm not doing that. I can't do that. Like, it's just not an option. Sometimes we have to, let things work themselves out because we've made a mess of them. And sometimes we make such a mess of our grief because we are just trying not to do these things. And I want to encourage you also to, if you believe the hype of what people say regarding your grief, you're going to be highly disappointed because time does not heal all wounds. I don't care what them people say. It does not. It's not. And, God only takes the best, does he? We'll never know. Because if I give my life to God right before I leave and I done some bad things, is God not going to take me? So those are the things that we convince ourselves of in order for us to be with grief. And then let me tell y'all, my favorite is God gives his greater battle to the strongest people. Ain't nowhere in the Bible. If I see it one more time on social media, I just be wanting to choke people because why do we say that? Why do we say that God gives his hardest battle to the strongest people? Where is that in the Bible? It ain't. It ain't. Because as I've said time and time again, our strength should not come in human form. It comes from God. And so we are saying that we are strong enough to keep going and dealing with these battles, and we're not. We're only as strong as God. Or shall I say, the God that we allow into our lives? Because some of us aren't allowing God into our lives because we're angry with him. I'm telling y'all, that is a bunch of baloney that the people out here selling and not the good kind. Okay. Sometimes, um, if we don't take care of our emotional and mental health, we end up doing more harm than good, not just to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, at our jobs, at church, all of these things, because we hold on to things. And let me tell you something, I encourage you to forgive yourself and forgive your person. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you. I had to forgive myself for allowing myself to stay in that horrible cycle of grief that I did. Once I realized how important it was for me and how easy it was for me when I decided to come on the other side, I realized, man, okay, I need to forgive myself for not getting here sooner because I felt like, man, if I had let this go before, I would have been all right. But I realized that wasn't what God had for me. That wasn't how God meant things to be for me. This was all a part of his plan and his process for me. So I got there when God was ready for me to get there. It's like a pressure gasket that, you must slowly but surely release the pressure so that it can function correctly. Grief is the same thing. Take it slow, day by day. Some days it'll be sunshine and roses, and sometimes you just want to crawl in a corner and be by yourself. But I encourage you on those days that you want to be by yourself, reach out to somebody. Reach out to your friends and family, those who you know love you and will be there for you and stand in the gap for you and hold that space for you. Do that. I'm reminded that yesterday I was looking at some things, and I'm reminded that, of Paul's experience, that there's a cost involved in suffering in our spirits for the sake of ourselves, filling up in flesh what is still lacking in Christ's afflictions and for the sake of his body. Um, that there's a cost involved. And a lot of times that cost we can't afford. Our health can't afford it. Our jobs can't afford it. Our children can't afford it. Our marriages can't afford it. Our friendships, our familiar relationships can't. Sometimes our expectations are the source of our pain because we're expecting certain things because of our grief. And we end up causing ourselves more pain than we should be. You know, Elijah complained, um, and, loudly. And, he was like, I gave God everything. And now I'm alone. Like, I don't got nobody. Like, this lady done ran me away. I don't understand. Like, everything I have is haunted and tainted. Everyone I trusted, you know what I'm saying, has not been there for me. And that crushed me. Like, God, what are you going to do? But what Elijah didn't realize, and that I realized for myself, is that my grief stricken heart needed that silence. In those moments that I was writing my book and convening with God, it needed that silence. Because in that moment of silence is when I heard and recognized the voice of God. It's when I realized that I could no longer subject myself and the people around me to holding on to something that God never told me to hold on to. God ain't never told me to hold on to this grief, to make it a thing, to wear it like a badge of honor. He never told me to do that. That was my doing. And I'm like, if I want to continue to grow in my relationship with God, continue to grow with my relationship with grief, then I got to not make this about grief, but make it about God. I had to learn how to allow God to supply me with my new norm while He poured me a new glass that He was going to fill this time because I was too busy trying to fill my own cup, trying to do things for people. Stop trying to give people things that you aren't giving yourself. It's just like when you're on an airplane, what they tell you to do first. They tell you to put your mask on first in order for you to help somebody. Same thing with grief. I realized I couldn't help other people because I wasn't really helping myself. Because if I was on that airplane and I didn't I can't help nobody if I'm dead. And sometimes we are so dead inside and we're trying to revive other people. Like, you don't have to do all of that. You can't revive somebody if you don't have oxygen yourself. Like, we're so busy thinking that it is not our job to save everybody. That's God's job. We don't have to save everybody. Because if we do, then what does that leave for ourselves? What are we leaving for ourselves? I don't ever want to be in that place again that I was where I realized that I was really out here, like literally cutting off my oxygen. I was cutting off all the things that I knew would keep me doing what I have to do, but not because I really wasn't operating in a space that I said I was supposed to. Like, I can't do that. And so, anytime those thoughts come up in your head, I want you to say, hey, I reject that thought because I'm listening for the voice of God. And you got to allow your pain to be a portal to God's grace. He wants us to be whole and operating in our gifts. And in order for us to do that, we got to stop letting these liabilities, people, grief, pain, hurt, anger, we got to let in these places stop having these liabilities, stop having these per having these asset privileges. How many people in your life are a liability, yet you give them the privileges of being an asset in your life? How many things are you giving in your life to have asset privileges? But they are. They're not an asset. They're not adding anything to your life. They're not adding they're not giving you anything. They're taking more than they're giving. But at the same time, we continue to let them in. And let's talk about grieving friendships, the friendships of people who are still alive and well, but no longer in your life. That's hard. You see them all the time, but that friendship is gone. But you've convinced yourself that, you know what I'm saying, you don't need to grieve that person because, it's fine. Because listen, you can still love them from afar, but don't need them in your life because two mutual feelings don't have to be exclusive. Because you can be sad and happy at the same time. You can feel joy and pain at the same time. Even though they're on the opposite end, they can still coexist together in an exclusive manner. Because sometimes I'm sad, but at the same time, sometimes I'm happy because this amazing thing has happened. I'm sad because my mom can't be here, but I'm also happy that I'm still able to be here to experience these things, especially for my kids. And sometimes that comes with making peace with your past and embracing your future with your open arms. And you can't embrace a future if you're still clinging to things that God has told you to let go. If God has told you to let go of that grief, this your sign. This it. Let it go. Give it to God. He wants it. Every single bit of it. The anger part of it, the denial part of it, the depression of it. When I tell you God met me in every single possible stage of grief there was for me, I mean, He met me in it. I felt like there was some days we would sit in crisscross applesauce just staring at each other. Like, who gonna go first? Like, who gonna go first? Me or him? Which one of us gonna go first? And he was waiting for me and I was waiting for him. But the thing about it is no matter how long, he didn't mind waiting for me. He didn't mind waiting for me to get it together, waiting for me to do what I had to do. He didn't mind any of that. He still sat with me in it in every single possible way because he didn't care about that. You can't allow holding on to shame and guilt and grief become a weapon. Don't let anybody weaponize your grief. Don't you weaponize it for other people. And stop letting grief be the reason why you treat people horribly. Because there are people out there who are treating people horribly. It's fine because I'm grieving. Don't let grief be a crutch. The whole point of crutches is for you to lean on them until you get your strength back. Let God be your crutch. Stop using them crutches out here and using it for an excuse for your bad behavior or for how you treat people. Because a lot of us out here are using grief as a weapon for us to be nasty and manipulative to the people in our lives when we call them and we want them to feel sorry for us. So, we conjure up this story and things because sometimes nobody wants to do anything alone. And so it's like, oh, I feel better if I know somebody, is making me feel like, okay, I'm fine. Because we got to stop giving, time and energy and effort into something, although when the cost outweighs the benefit. Like you got to stop letting grief drain you. You got to fight to hold on and hold on to God because God don't make no mistakes. And don't let one loss give birth to another. Because sometimes when we have that grief, like, okay, this loss, and now I'm losing more things, and I continue to give birth to another loss, and another loss, and another loss, and another loss. And then I look back and I got nothing and nobody because I have let grief come in and infiltrate the entire foundation that God has built for me. And now one loss had turned into another, not by God's hands, but by my own because I haven't tended to myself, because I haven't went to God in prayer, because I haven't read my Bible, because I haven't found the people who God has sent me. You can't keep hoping for things and hoping that your grief gets better. You got to have faith that your grief gets better because let me tell y'all something. Hope can kill your faith. because hope can paralyze you in your thoughts and situation where faith gives you options. Faith gives you options because regardless to however it ends up happening, your faith can move mountains. Hope can't do that. Hope can paralyze you because I hope this happened. I hope this happened. But when that doesn't happen, what happens? What you gonna do? But faith, it gives you options, especially when your faith is put in God. Your faith has to come from God. And you got to stop sweeping your trauma under the rug. That doesn't provide you any healing. If you are grieving a trauma from your childhood, from your adulthood, from relationships, from a job, from a place that was toxic, don't sweep it under the rug. Help it be front and center. Because sometimes we are standing in the way of our own healing. We're standing in the way of our own blessings because now we're holding our future accountable for past trauma. So here I am letting you all know that I'm no longer holding my mother's death as keeping me from being accountable for my future or the trauma that it was. I don't want to block my blessings anymore. I don't want to block where God is taking me. I don't want to block the healing that is going to come from this because I refuse to let things go. And one more thing before I go, we open up for questions. I want to, say this to you. You know, they always say that, we're strong and that comes from birth. When you're born, they're like, oh, look at that strong baby. And it's like this invisible, badge of honor and resilience that they give us. They tell us, we got to walk around with our head held high because, God loves us and we're strong and, all of these things. And we're taught that we should weather storms with grace and carry these burdens that will break us, all while keeping a smile on our face. Like you're supposed to just walk around here, no matter what you're going through, with a smile on your face. But who tells us that it's okay not to be strong? Who gives us space to crumble when the weight of the world becomes too heavy for us? They praise our strength, but they forget that behind all of that strength is somebody who needs to be saved by God's grace and mercy. That's just a facade that we put up, a facade of resilience that we sometimes do not have, because all of that lies in Jesus. And when we need to unravel and we need to fall apart and breathe and simply be, we should do that. We should ask God for those things. Because behind every cape of strength that we have, there's God. Who do you think holding that cape up and letting us fly? It's God. You all deserve to be in a healing space. I tell people all the time, I don't necessarily consider myself to be healed from my grief. I consider myself to be on a healing journey because I will constantly, grief will always show up. I'll always miss my mom. As long as I'm here on earth doing things, I will always do those things. But I realize that my mom's death also, as much as it broke me, it also made me. It made me who God has called me to be in this season. It gave me a sense of vulnerability. It allowed me to be a vessel for God and to do work in his kingdom by helping people learn that they don't need anybody else's permission to grieve the way that they see fit. I may have lost my earth, but I'll see her in heaven. That is the one thing that I know. And let me tell y'all something. As much as these people like to say they don't, God be out here playing favorites, and you his favorite. And he loves you, and he's going to take care of you.